What should the government do to deal with this, then?
Well, I think they need to stick to the line that they're on at the moment. I say this as someone who's left of centre. I mean, but the problem with this is the timing of it and the optics from the unions are terrible. We've just gone through 2 years of a pandemic crisis where millions of people either lost their jobs or their jobs were at threat or their businesses were shut. We've now got a cost of living crisis that's come down the tracks, which is affecting the majority of people in this country to tighten their belts, whether it's on fuel or food, or indeed travel. We've actually got a cost of no travel crisis with this as well. So we've got a situation here whereby whether it's fuel prices, whether it's rail strikes, whether it's a lot of the flights cancelled as well, it's all stacking up. And the public are looking at this, and I don't think there's going to be much sympathy.
No, there isn't going to be any sympathy as far as I'm concerned anyway. And look, I think people can see straight through this. I don't really think this is about the money. How can it be? You've got the likes of that guy there, Mick Lynch or whatever he's called. He's on 124 big ones a year. The guy before him was on something similar to that. If I was driving a tube... Let me teach you how to drive a tube now, James. Forward, stop. That's it, right? 50-odd grand a year. What's the point of that? Robot tubes is what I'm calling for as a result of this. Now, this is just political, isn't it?
I think it is political, but it's also about the timing of it. I mean, the whole country are basically told to tighten their belts and basically muck in together. We're in all this together on a cost of living crisis. Now, the cost of living crisis wasn't created by the majority of people in this country. But what we want is basically an understanding from our unions that they can't push more pay rises when basically most people in this country are having to pay more for a lot less in terms of their actual public services right now. It is actually becoming very, very difficult travelling around this country, whether it's by car, whether it's by plane, whether it's by train. People are getting almost entrapped either because of price or lack of supply.
Absolutely. And the service isn't great. I was told to stop banging on about the Avanti West Coast service last week, but I will not do that because the Avanti West Coast service is absolutely shocking. It's destination lottery. Oh, I'd quite like to go to Manchester, please. Bingo, you're in Birmingham. Why? Why is this happening? And yet you're going on strike to demand a better pay for it. I find that a little bit weird. Where do this lot think all this money comes from, by the way?
Yeah, well, the government are always saying as well, there's no magic money tree. That doesn't seem to stop, for instance, the Bank of England printing 500 billion of quantitative easing over the last 2 years, which are actually coming back as another consequence of inflation. But there isn't money. We're told that by the government the whole time. But they're only saying there isn't money in terms of us, and that's in terms of pricing. And at the moment, I think the public are going to look at this. It's not like the austerity era where there was a coherent argument about putting more money into public services. There's a decade of that around. This is different. We're in a cost of living crisis. The different ways people are all being affected by this. And most of the public are going to look at this. It's not just about them wanting more money. It's about the disruption involved in this as well, about whether people are taking their kids to school, whether they've got an emergency, whether they're trying to get to work.
Yeah, it's shocking. But this lot don't care about a potential loss of life. This lot don't care. They claim to be on the side of workers. Well, you're knocking 150 million quid off the economy for just 3 days' worth of strike action. I don't see how that benefits any worker in this country, frankly. What about the people who literally can't get to work? My concern, though, James, apart from arguably all of it, will be that this might pave the way. Grant Shapps there said, hey, you're paid a lot more than nurses. Well, hang on a minute now. Do nurses look at this and they go on strike as well? Do you think we're going to have a summer of discontent?
Yes, I think we are. That tends to happen in times of trouble economically. I mean, history's taught us that. I think this is why the government are in a tricky situation here, but there's got to be a bit of brinkmanship in this. And I'm no fan of the Tory government. I think they're an appalling government. But on this one, if they budge an inch on this, then I think other things will happen in terms of strike action as well. And I think the public, who've got no faith in this government at all whatsoever, based on their handling of all kinds of things over the last few years, we'll look at this and think, well, if they budge on this, then other things will come down the tracks. But for the public right now, they're looking at this and they're annoyed for two aspects. An organisation wanting more money, combined with the threats of disruption at a time where most people can ill afford to miss work, or they're being told that they have to tighten their belts in terms of the cost of living. But we are facing, I think, a cost of no transport crisis as well, because it's happening not just in rail, it's happening in terms of air, it's happening in terms of people's costs of getting around the country if they're travelling by car.
No, look, absolutely. And James, I certainly wouldn't want to, see... I would rather not live in a country where a huge section of our rail community was demonised, I suppose. I would just rather we had a functional rail service, right? That would be preferable. But if they press ahead with this, Boris Johnson or the government could create a bit of an enemy. They could create an us and them thing, couldn't they? Very easily, in the way that we've been talking tonight. This lot, they're stopping you getting to work. Your kids can't get to school. Did you want to go and see your nan in hospital at the weekend? You couldn't do it because the RMT wouldn't let you. And actually, maybe in a cost-of-living crisis, maybe when we've got our back to the wall as a nation, it might not be the worst thing in the world for Boris Johnson to almost be able to point at, quotes unquote, a bit of an enemy.
Well, possibly. I mean, it's, you know, there's arguments this might be a Machiavellian tactic for the government. I don't buy that. I think the government is asleep at the wheel in all of this aspect in terms of the crisis. It's all been stacking up all different areas, and that's their responsibility in terms of what's happened before to get us to this place, but it's also how to get us out of this as well. So you've got individuals are looking at zero-sum game choices about putting food on the table, turning the lights on, getting in the car to work, or getting on the train. And in fact, so there's consequences if they go on strike. So you end up creating another supply chain crisis. You end up a supply chain crisis of work. People sending their kids to school, whatever it might be. If people are finding it difficult to travel by train, or flights are cancelled, or it's too expensive to get in the car, that has an enormous knock-on effect in terms of the overall status quo of the economy.